At the time, I thought maybe I'd been texting too much or my hand was fatigued, but a few weeks later, I noticed it had gotten a little worse.
Hollywood loves a perfect ending, but Eric Dane's story isn't written in a script. For years, he was McSteamy, the man who had it all. Then, the cameras stopped rolling. The headlines turned dark, whispering about a tragic health battle and a final goodbye from the woman by his side. But what if the tragedy isn't what you think? Behind the tabloid smoke and mirrors lies a raw, human truth. This isn't a eulogy, it's the autopsy of a legend's survival. The rise of an icon. In 2006, a man walked out of a bathroom wearing nothing but a steam-dampened towel and a smirk that felt like it was personally directed at every person sitting on their couch. That moment didn't just make Eric Dane a star.
I just remember walking out of a bathroom with a very nice gentleman kind of blowing smoke towards me.
It turned him into a permanent fixture of the American subconscious. As Mark Sloan on Grey's Anatomy, Dane wasn't just a character, he was McSteamy.
McSteamy! Eric Dane got pulses racing, playing the very handsome Dr. Mark Sloan.
It was a nickname that carried the weight of an impossible standard. He was the personification of the alpha, flawless, surgical, and seemingly bulletproof. But the problem with becoming an icon is that the world starts to forget there is a human being underneath the pedestal. While the fans were swooning, Eric Dane was navigating the peculiar, often suffocating reality of being one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. To the public, he was the guy who had it all: the hit show, the supermodel wife, and a look that didn't seem to age. He was Hollywood's golden boy, the silver fox who represented a specific brand of masculine perfection. However, fame is a double-edged sword, especially when your brand is built on being invincible. In the mid-2000s, the golden age of television was at its peak, and the pressure to maintain that status was immense. Dane was working grueling 18-hour days on set, surrounded by the artificial perfection of a medical drama, only to step out into the blinding flashes of the paparazzi. He and his wife, Rebecca Gayheart, were the it couple, constantly trailed by cameras that were waiting for a single crack in the veneer. The rise was meteoric, but the altitude was thinning. In Hollywood, you are only as good as your last scene, and for Dane, the scene was always the same. Be the hunk, be the hero, be the heartthrob. We saw a man who looked like he had conquered the world, but we weren't seeing the toll that the climb was taking on his spirit. Behind the scenes, the McSteamy persona was becoming a suit of armor that was getting heavier by the day. The industry has a way of commodifying people, stripping away their complexities until they are just a collection of traits. For Dane, those traits were handsome and confident. He played the part to perfection, but as any actor will tell you, playing a version of yourself that the world demands is the most exhausting role of all. He was living the dream, but the dream was beginning to feel like a very loud, very crowded room with no exit. This era of his life was defined by a specific kind of noise: the roar of the crowd, the buzz of the tabloids, and the constant hum of expectation. It's the part of the story we all know, or at least the part we think we know. We saw the red carpets and the magazine covers. We saw the smiles and the effortless charm. What we didn't see were the moments after the lights went down, when the towel was dropped for real, and the man in the mirror had to face a reality that no amount of TV magic could fix. The icon was rising, but the man was starting to wonder how much longer he could keep the gravity at bay. But behind the towel and the smirk, a storm was brewing: the 2017 disappearance. In April 2017, the steady hum of a Hollywood success story suddenly cut to black. Eric Dane was at the helm of the TNT action drama The Last Ship.
Premiere of The Last Ship on TNT. That's this Sunday.
Because we filmed the show and it airs simultaneously, so
Yes.
I can't...
Playing Captain Tom Chandler, a character defined by grit, leadership, and an unwavering moral compass. The show was a hit, and production was moving at a breakneck pace. filming seasons 4 and 5 back-to-back. But while his character was busy saving the world from a global pandemic, the actor behind the uniform was quietly drowning. Without warning, production was halted. The official statement from his representative was sparse but heavy. Dane was taking a break to deal with personal issues related to a battle with depression. For the public, this felt like a glitch in the Matrix. This was McSteamy. This was the man who had survived a high-profile rehab stint for painkiller addiction in 2011 and come out the other side looking stronger than ever. We are conditioned to believe that celebrities, especially those who look like they were carved out of granite, don't just stop, but Dane did. He didn't wait for a public breakdown or a tabloid scandal to force his hand. He stepped away because he realized that the ship he was steering was sinking, and for the first time in his career, he didn't have the tools to plug the holes. When he finally resurfaced months later on the Today Show, the man sitting on the couch wasn't the invincible captain. He was someone who had been hit by a truck.
But this just hit me like a truck. I had to take some time off. I went away, I took care of it, and I'm feeling great.
Dane described the onset of his depression as something that felt physical, a leaden weight that made the simple act of getting out of bed feel like climbing a mountain. He spoke about seeing doctors to check if something was physically wrong with him, unable to fathom why he felt so low when his life, on paper, was so high. It was a rare, jarring moment of vulnerability from a male lead in an industry that usually demands stoicism. He admitted he felt conflicted because he couldn't point to a specific tragedy to justify his sadness. This 2017 hiatus was the first time the saying goodbye narrative began to take root in the darker corners of the internet. Because the production shut down so abruptly, the rumor mill went into overdrive. Speculation ran wild. Was it a relapse? Was it a terminal illness? The vacuum of information was filled with the kind of sensationalist noise that still haunts his Google search results today. But the reality was far more nuanced. He wasn't saying goodbye to his life. He was saying goodbye to the pretense of perfection. He started taking medication, he sought therapy, and he began the slow process of reintroducing himself to a world that only wanted to see the hunk. However, looking back from the vantage point of 2026, we realize that 2017 was merely the prologue. While he conquered that specific mountain of depression and returned to finish the last ship,
I wrapped Grays and then right into working on the last ship, filmed the pilot for about a month and a half, and then we took a year off because our schedule was...
the experience changed the chemistry of his career. He stopped chasing the golden boy roles and started looking for characters with cracks. He had learned that the physical realities of one's health can't be ignored, a lesson that would become devastatingly relevant years later. The 2017 disappearance wasn't a career-ending move. It was a necessary retreat. It was the moment Eric Dane realized that his value wasn't tied to his ability to remain unshakable. This period also tested the foundations of his home life. Rebecca Gayheart stood by him through the shutdown, navigating the fallout of a husband who was suddenly, and very publicly, broken. The tabloids looked for signs of a split, but what they found instead was a family circling the wagons. They were dealing with the reality of mental health in a town that prefers to prescribe a vacation over a medical leave. The tragic health battle headlines of today often borrow the imagery of this 2017 era, blurring the lines between his past struggle with depression and his current, much more grueling fight against ALS. Ultimately, the 2017 chapter serves as a reminder of how quickly we try to write the ending of a celebrity's story the moment they show a sign of weakness. We saw a production hiatus and assumed a finale. We saw a man admit to depression and assumed he was gone. But Dane's return to the screen was a middle finger to the idea that a health struggle is a period at the end of a sentence. It was a comma. He proved that you could step into the darkness, stay there for as long as you needed, and still find your way back to the light. He was no longer just the guy in the towel. He was the guy who had looked into the abyss and decided he wasn't finished yet. The silence of 2017 wasn't a goodbye. It was a deep breath. It was the necessary pause before the most challenging and transformative years of his life would begin. As the cameras started rolling again on the last ship, Eric Dane wasn't just playing a captain anymore. He was the captain of his own survival, navigating through a fog that most people are too afraid to even acknowledge. The world thought they were watching the beginning of the end, but in reality, they were just watching a man learn how to fight for himself. In a town that never sleeps, Eric Dane decided to finally wake up. Rebecca Gayheart and the goodbye narrative. To understand the weight of the saying goodbye headlines, you have to understand the partnership that anchored Eric Dane's life for nearly 2 decades. Rebecca Gayheart wasn't just a spouse, she was a co-pilot in a life lived under a microscope. When they married in 2004, they were the quintessential Hollywood power couple, the Noxzema Girl and McSteamy. They were beautiful, successful, and seemingly untouchable. But as any long-term partner knows, the person the world sees on the red carpet is rarely the person who sits across the kitchen table. For Rebecca, the goodbye wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow, agonizing transition through layers of public scrutiny and private hardship. The narrative of goodbye first took a literal turn in 2018 when Rebecca filed for divorce after 14 years of marriage. The world was shocked, but the reality was that they had been weathered by years of internal storms. From navigating the fallout of a leaked private video early in their marriage to supporting Eric through his highly publicized 2011 stint in rehab for painkiller addiction, the couple had already lived through several lifetimes of drama. When the divorce was announced, the headlines were quick to paint a picture of abandonment. However, the truth was far more complex. They weren't saying goodbye to each other. They were saying goodbye to a marriage that had been stretched to its breaking point by the very tragic health battles the tabloids now exploit. In the years following the filing, something strange happened. They never actually left each other's side. They became the poster children for conscious uncoupling, before that was even a trendy term. They were frequently spotted vacationing together with their 2 daughters, Billy and Georgia, proving that a family doesn't have to break just because a marriage does. This ambiguity is exactly what the modern clickbait machine feeds on. When a video title screams that Eric Dane's wife is saying goodbye, it intentionally ignores the fact that Rebecca has remained his fiercest protector and closest confidant. She didn't walk away when things got hard. She simply changed the nature of her presence. The goodbye narrative took on a much more somber tone as rumors of Eric's physical health began to circulate in 2024 and 2025. This is where the documentary style of his life hits a heartbreaking crescendo. While the 2017 battle was about the mind, the more recent whispers, often amplified by AI-generated tribute videos, suggest a much more physical toll. In these sensationalized stories, Rebecca is portrayed as the grieving widow-to-be, a character in a melodrama designed to farm clicks. It's a cruel irony. The woman who stood by him through addiction and depression is now being used as a prop in a digital hoax about his demise. The goodbye they are referencing isn't a divorce decree, it's a fabricated finality. But if we look at the actual footage of them together in recent years, the story isn't one of tragedy, but of radical loyalty. Rebecca has spoken openly about the heavy lifting required to maintain a relationship with someone battling chronic health issues. She has been the one to correct the record, to push back against the invasive lenses, and to ensure their daughters see a father who is fighting, not a father who is failing. The saying goodbye hook is effective because it plays on our fear of loss. But in the context of the Dane Gayheart story, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of their bond. They chose a path of deep, platonic love that survived the wreckage of a romantic collapse. The tabloid industry loves a victim, and they love a grieving wife even more. By framing Rebecca's journey as a goodbye, these outlets strip her of her agency. They ignore the strength it takes to stay in the life of an ex-partner who is struggling. They ignore the bravery it takes to co-parent in the shadow of a health crisis. The real story isn't about her leaving, It's about her staying in the ways that actually matter. It's about the quiet conversations away from the cameras and the pact they made to protect their children from the roar of the internet. The goodbye was to the McSteamy fantasy, not to the man himself. As we dissect the saying goodbye narrative, we see it for what it truly is, a weaponization of empathy. We see a headline about a wife saying goodbye, and our hearts break, making us click, watch, and share. But in doing so, we participate in the erasure of their real progress. Rebecca Gayhart's role in Eric Dane's life hasn't been to exit stage left, but to provide the steady ground he needed to undergo his most difficult transformations. She didn't say goodbye to him. She said goodbye to the expectations of a town that demands you either stay perfect or disappear. Ultimately, this chapter of their lives teaches us that relationships are not binary. They aren't just together or apart. In the face of a tragic health battle, the definitions of wife, ex, and friend all blur into one thing: witness. Rebecca has been the primary witness to Eric Dane's life, for better and for worse. The goodbye the internet keeps talking about is a ghost story. The reality is a much more enduring, messy, and beautiful form of hello. A constant reintroduction to one another as they navigate a future that looks nothing like the one they planned in 2004. It wasn't a funeral. It was the end of an era. The anatomy of a diagnosis. In the medical world, ALS is often referred to as the glass coffin. It is a disease that leaves the mind perfectly intact, while slowly, methodically disconnecting the wires between the brain and the muscles. For a man like Eric Dane, whose entire career was built on his physical presence, his posture, and his commanding movements, this diagnosis was more than a health crisis. It was an existential reckoning. The first signs didn't arrive with a bang or a dramatic fall. They arrived in the most mundane moments. A dropped pair of chopsticks at a family dinner, a slight fumbling with a shirt button, a strange weakness in his right hand that he initially laughed off as texting fatigue. When the official diagnosis came in April 2025, it wasn't just a private moment for Eric, it became a public mission. He didn't just announce he was sick, he invited the world to watch the progression. This transparency is rare in Hollywood, a place that usually hides its imperfections. But Dane realized that by showing the physical realities, the wheelchair, the loss of his dominant arm, the strain in his voice, he could do more for the ALS community than 1,000 red carpet walks ever could. He became a man on a deadline, and that deadline gave him a new kind of power. By the summer of 2025, Eric's advocacy had moved from the doctor's office to the halls of power in Washington, D.C. He famously met with Medicare and Medicaid officials and spoke alongside political figures to push for the ACT for ALS, a piece of legislation aimed at speeding up access to experimental treatments for people who don't have the luxury of waiting 10 years for a trial. In these moments, the McSteamy charm was still there, but it was sharpened by a desperate urgency. He wasn't lobbying for himself. He knew the timeline of ALS too well. He was lobbying for the people who would come after him. He was using his fame as a battering ram to break down the bureaucratic doors of the healthcare system. The personal life aspect of this battle is perhaps the most poignant. Eric has been incredibly vocal about his primary motivation: his daughters, Billy and Georgia. In a viral 2025 video, he spoke about ringing every bell because he wanted to be there for the big moments, the graduations, the weddings, the quiet Sundays. He admitted that on any given day, he had no reason to be in a good spirit, yet he chose to show up. He chose to participate in virtual panels for the organization I Am ALS, even when the disease had progressed so much that travel was no longer an option. He proved that purpose is the best medicine for the spirit, even when there is no medicine for the body. One of the most profound examples of this was his guest role on the NBC drama Brilliant Minds in late 2025. In a meta-commentary on his own life, he played a firefighter named Matthew, who was grappling with an ALS diagnosis. It was a haunting performance because the audience knew that the tremors in his hands and the difficulty in his speech weren't acting. He was using his craft to bridge the gap between celebrity and patient. He wanted people to see the reality of the disease, the way it attacks the body quickly and without mercy, but also the way a human being can remain dignified in the face of it. It was a performance that stripped away the last of the Hollywood artifice. As we move into 2026, the physical toll has become undeniable. Friends like Patrick Dempsey have shared that Eric now requires 24-hour nursing care. He missed the ALS Network's gala in January 2026 because the physical realities made it impossible to attend. But even in his absence, he was the loudest voice in the room. He sent a message that echoed his new life philosophy. "I'm not about to concede my purpose for some disease." This is the core of the Eric Dane story now. It's not about the tragedy of what is being lost, it's about the incredible strength of what remains. He has become a living legend, not for his roles on screen, but for the role he is playing in real life. This section of his life is also defined by the people who stayed. While some in his circle drifted away, as often happens when a fun friend becomes a sick friend, his core support system became an unbreakable wall. Rebecca Gayhart's transition from ex-wife to primary caregiver is a narrative of grace that defies the standard Hollywood divorce story. They proved that family is a choice you make every day. They live only 12 minutes apart, maintaining a familial love that prioritizes Eric's comfort and his time with his children. It's a messy, complicated, beautiful arrangement that shows the world what showing up really looks like. Finally, we have to look at the upcoming release of his memoir, Book of Days. Writing a book when you can no longer use your dominant hand is a monumental task. It involved voice-to-text technology, long hours of dictation, and the painful process of revisiting his golden boy past while sitting in a wheelchair. The book is his final gift to his daughters, a way to ensure that they know not just the actor the world loved, but the man who fought for every extra second with them. He is capturing the beautiful days and the hard ones, ensuring that his legacy is written in his own words, not in the font of a tabloid headline. In a world of noise, his silence became the most powerful sound of all, the euphoria of a second act. While the world was busy whispering about his past, Eric Dane was busy reinventing his future. In a town that usually discards its heartthrobs the moment a gray hair appears, Dane did the unthinkable. He became more relevant, more dangerous, and more respected than ever. This second act wasn't just a career shift, it was a total demolition of the McSteamy brand. By the time he stepped onto the set of HBO's Euphoria as Cal Jacobs, Eric Dane had stopped trying to be the guy everyone wanted him to be. He leaned into the wreckage, the darkness, and the profound discomfort of being human. It was during this creative peak, however, that life threw him a curveball that no amount of acting could prepare him for. In April 2025, just as he was beginning to feel like an artist for the first time in his career, Dane received a diagnosis that would change everything: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS.
About his ALS diagnosis, you may know it as Lou Gehrig's disease, and Diane sat down with the Grey's Anatomy star to talk about his health battle.
The news was a seismic shock to the industry. Here was a man who, at 52, was delivering the best work of his life, only to be told his body was beginning to betray him. But instead of retreating into the shadows as he had in 2017, Dane chose a path of radical transparency. He went on Good Morning America and told Diane Sawyer the sobering truth. He explained that while his left side was still holding on, his right side had essentially stopped working. It was a moment of raw humanity that instantly turned the saying goodbye clickbait into a real-time battle for awareness. His role as Cal Jacobs took on a haunting new layer of significance. Cal is a man who spent his life hiding his true self behind a mask of rigid, suburban masculinity, a mask that eventually shatters in a spectacular drunken monologue. For Dane, playing a man whose life is physically and emotionally unraveling while his own body was facing a terminal decline was a feat of immense courage. He insisted on continuing to work on Euphoria Season 3, telling fans he would stay until the wheels fall off. He traded the sterile, safe environment of network TV for a show that demanded he show his literal and metaphorical scars. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a man using his craft to process his own mortality. This era of his life is perhaps the most euphoric because of the clarity it brought. In late 2025, Maria Shriver's publishing imprint announced Dane's memoir, Book of Days, a memoir in moments, set for release in 2026. The book isn't a list of Hollywood parties, it's a chronicle of what happens when the golden boy has to learn to live in a wheelchair. It covers everything from his first day on the Grey's Anatomy set to the moment he realized he could no longer lift his right arm. By documenting his journey, Dane shifted the narrative from tragedy to legacy. He made it clear that while ALS might take his mobility, it would never take his voice or his purpose. The support from his peers has been nothing short of a Hollywood ending in its own right. Patrick Dempsey, his former on-screen rival and off-screen friend, has been a constant source of support, texting him regularly and publicly praising his incredible courage. Dempsey even tried to cast him in his new series, Memory of a Killer, but the physical realities of the disease, the rapid progression that by early 2026 required 24-hour nursing care, made it impossible. These updates from friends don't feel like tabloid gossip. They feel like dispatches from a front line. They show a community rallying around a man who spent decades being the loner hunk, finally allowing himself to be carried by others. Rebecca Gayhart's role in this second act has been equally transformative. In a candid 2025 essay for The Cut, she described the transition from ex-wife to caregiver-in-chief. She spoke about the 24/7 nurses in their home and the heartbreaking speed at which the disease attacks the body. But she also spoke about the laughter that still echoes in their house and the way their daughters, Billy and Georgia, have stepped up with a maturity that defies their years. This is the real goodbye that was happening, a goodbye to the bitterness of their divorce in favor of a profound, unified front against an unbeatable enemy. Even as he missed major events in early 2026, like the ALS Network Gala, where he was named Advocate of the Year, Dane's presence remained massive. He sent a pre-recorded message, his voice noticeably different, but his spirit unmistakably sharp. He told the crowd that his life isn't about me anymore. He has become the face of a movement, using his remaining strength to lobby for better research and faster access to treatments. He turned a tragic health battle into a masterclass in how to live with dignity. He proved that even when the body is failing, the artist inside can still create something beautiful. The euphoria of this stage isn't about happiness, it's about the intense, vivid reality of being alive and being loved. Eric Dane has shed every layer of the McSteamy myth. He is no longer the guy in the towel. He is the man in the chair, the man with the pen, and the man with the message. He has reached a level of authenticity that most people never achieve in a lifetime of perfect health. As he waits for the release of his memoir and the final bow of his career, he is teaching us that the most important role you can ever play is yourself, no matter how difficult that self becomes to maintain. He traded the scrub suit for something much more uncomfortable: the truth. Eric Dane isn't a tragic headline, he's a living testament to resilience. By trading the McSteamy mask for raw honesty, he's rewritten his ending. He didn't say goodbye to life, he said goodbye to the silence. Today, he remains a father, an advocate, and a survivor, proving that legacy is earned through truth. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this video. Leave your comments below and subscribe to the channel for more deep dive stories.